To your descendants I will give this land. This promise is given to Abraham, his son Isaac, and his son Jacob. With these men, the history of Israel begins. Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt. Joshua leads them into the Promised Land. Israel becomes a nation. Centuries later, they're expelled from their land by the Assyrians and the Babylonians. At this time, the prophet Isaiah arises and proclaims, "In that day the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people. He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four quarters of the earth." In the year of 70 AD, under the Roman general Titus, Jerusalem and the Second Temple were destroyed. A final dramatic attempt by the Jews to regain their sovereignty and their land begins with the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 132 AD. After the destruction of the Jewish army, Bar Kokhba's fall and the death of some 600,000 Jews. In order to finally annihilate Israel, the Roman Emperor Hadrian renames Judah Palestine. The children of Israel are now a dispersed people. Until in the 19th century, something extraordinary takes place in Eastern Europe. The movement of Zionism is born. Dear viewers, today I would like to introduce you to an extraordinary person. His name is David Gurion. He is one of the most important Jewish personalities of the 20th century. What he has achieved for Israel and for the Jewish people is close to miraculous. Welcome to this episode of Fascination Israel. Mr. Ben Gurion, you have sent us the points on which you would like to speak to us.
Yes.
One of it was the importance of the Jewish homeland. Would you please make your statement?
I say on behalf of the Jews that the Bible is our mandate. The Bible, which was written by us, in our own language, in Hebrew, in this very country. That is our mandate. Our right is as old as the Jewish people. We are here for two reasons, unprecedented in history. The first is this: Palestine is the only country in the world that the Jews, not as individuals but as a nation, as a race, can regard as their own country, as their historic homeland. And the second reason is this: there is no other nation which regards this country as their only homeland. We are here in our own right and regard the Jewish national home as an end in itself.
Ben Gurion said during the debate with the Peel Commission, the Bible is our deed for the land. Namely, that the right of the Jews for the land is based on the Bible.
It was the first partition plan during the Peel Conference. And actually, England, they offered the Jews only a very small part.
That's right.
But Ben Gurion agreed on that, and this was very controversial, right?
That's right. And Ben Gurion was one of the first people to understand that the important thing was not having this area or that area, but having a Jewish independence. And this was the first time that a major power said the Jews are entitled to independence in the land of Israel. So territory was a different matter, but the principle of independence was the most important one.
From that point on, David Ben Gurion became one of the main figures in the Zionist movement. His name is known worldwide as the founder of the State of Israel. But who actually was this man, David Ben Gurion?
May I introduce myself to you? My name is David Grun, from the small town of Plonsk in Poland, which at that time is part of the Russian Tsarist Empire. I was born on October 16, 1886, the fourth son of Scheindel and Avigdor Grun. Plonsk has some 8,000 inhabitants, of which a good 5,000 are Jews. There are 3 synagogues and several Jewish schools, which I attended until my bar mitzvah.
When you think about his origins, I visited the small town that he was born in, Płońsk, 60 kilometers from Warsaw. And he came from a lower middle class family. In Płońsk, they did not even have a high school.
Although I would have liked to continue my studies, I was deprived of higher education because there was no high school in Plonsk. And, for example, my father could not afford for me to study in Warsaw.
He did not receive at home the education that he needed. Compared, for instance, to Herzl or to Chaim Weizmann, the other leaders of the Zionist movement. They came from a higher middle class and they went to university. Ben Gurion did not have formal education at all.
The Greens are quite a modern family, 100% Jewish, yes, but nonetheless also open to new movements. When the Hibbett Zion movement, the Lovers of Zion, emerges in the 1880s, the forerunner of modern Zionism, the Green family enthusiastically joins them.
It goes without saying that his father was a Zionist. And was already not immersed in religion. He He wore a jacket, not the long coats that religious Jews wore. And he was more open to general education.
At the age of 11, David Gruen loses his mother. She dies of blood poisoning after giving birth to her 11th child. The boy suffers greatly from the loss. He later states that life at the time seemed meaningless. His good friend Shlomo Fuchs remarks that his mother's death caused him pain that never really healed. After the meteoric rise of Theodor Herzl, who also visits Plonsk in these years, the Zionist conviction in the Gruen family gets even stronger.
It is no exaggeration to say that even when I was 3 years old, I had daydreams about coming to Palestine. And certainly since the age of 10, I have never thought about spending my life anywhere else.
Avigdor Gruen departs Zionism to his children, especially to David. Already early on, he sees his special talents in his son. Because he wants to foster him, he writes a letter to Theodor Herzl in January 1901. Even though I cannot personally come before my master, the Exalted One, I nevertheless feel that a particular issue of personal nature is relevant to the concerns of the masses. I have been blessed by God with a magnificent son, who is diligent in his studies, aged 14. His soul thirsts for learning, is proficient in Hebrew as well as the local language. Avigdor Gruen wants to send his son to university in Vienna and asks Theodor Herzl for financial help. Admittedly somewhat naive, he must have expected not to get an answer.
I threw myself heart and soul into the Zionist movement. At that time, I was 14 years of age. Together with my two best friends, Shlomo Fuchs and Shlomo Zimak, we decided to only converse in Hebrew.
His grandfather taught him Hebrew as a small child, and he spoke Hebrew before he came to Palestine, which was something unheard of at that time.
As if that weren't enough, the three friends, above all David Gruen at the age of 14, found the Zionist youth group Ezra. They want to teach Hebrew and Jewish youth and convey the love for Zion, coupled with the dream of returning to Eretz Israel.
We name it after Ezra, the great teacher who returned to Jerusalem from Babylon to rebuild the temple, because we recognized a clear parallel between Ezra's mission and our own newborn hopes for Eretz Israel.
In 1904, a dramatic year for the Zionist movement when Theodor Herzl dies unexpectedly. The second Aliyah is about to begin. Despite knowing that living conditions there are very tough, and the ruling Ottomans are hostile towards Jewish immigration, thousands of Jews are returning to Eretz Israel. Fueled by pogroms and disenfranchisement in Europe, more than 35,000 emigrating Jews hope for a better future in Palestine. In July 1906, David Gruen decides his time in Plonsk is over. With a group of emigrants, he boards a ship for Palestine, arriving at Jaffa port in September.
We do not emigrate for negative reasons, but for the positive reason of rebuilding the Jewish homeland.
For David Gruen, entering Eretz Israel is one of the most important events in his life. It symbolizes a new birth. Hence, hardly after his arrival, he now changes his name. David Gruen becomes David Ben Gurion.
I derive my new name from the famous Ben Gurion, the heroic fighter in the revolt against Rome in 70 AD.
He came as a 20-year-old young boy with no money. What kept him alive?
He was a very determined young man. He had the vision of the rejuvenation of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, and this was for him the guiding spirit.
Was it also the trust in these ancient writings of the prophets?
It goes without saying that for Ben Gurion, the Bible was of the most important creations in the world. Actually, he saw in the Bible not only the guiding light for the state of Israel, but also the moral teaching of the prophets. And for him, this was the moral guidance all his life. Ben Gurion, because of the mixture of nationalism and socialism, chose from the Bible the moral guidance for equality of society. For him, this was the source of socialism.
While still in Plons, Ben Gurion was a co-founder of the political party Poale Zion, the working class of Zion. Barely 4 weeks in the country, Ben Gurion is now involved in the founding of Poale Zion of Palestine. It gives him a platform for his political activities.
He was a very political person. The first time he showed interest in politics was during the first Russian Revolution in 1905. And actually, you could see that it activated him, the political activity. It was something that made him feel that he found his vocation. And the politics for him was leading to the establishment of a Jewish independence in the land of Israel.
At this time, Ben Gurion still believes that a Jewish independence can be achieved with the Turkish Ottomans in Palestine.
With my dear friend Isaac Ben Zvi, in 1911 I set out for Istanbul to study law and to seek contacts with the Young Turks, who had just come to power. Instead, however, we are exiled to Egypt by the new rulers because of our Zionistic convictions.
In the meantime, the First World War has broken out, and in May 1915, Ben Gurion sets out for New York. There he meets a young lady named Pauline Munwais, a Jewish immigrant from Minsk.
Paula offered her help in the library, where I conducted some of my research for my new book. We develop a friendship, fall in love, and get married in December 1917.
David knows I'm not a Zionist. I don't speak Hebrew, I don't read books like he does, and I don't share his ideas, at least not at this point. But I'm impressed by him. As soon as he opens his mouth, I feel the greatness of this man. Before we married, he made it clear to me that I would have to leave America and come with him to Palestine. I agreed and would stay by his side until the end. Together, we have 3 children, Gulia, Amos, and Renana.
Ben Gurion was a person very accessible to people. So I did not hesitate to write to him and ask him for an interview. And lo and behold, after a week, I got a reply inviting me to come 2 weeks later on Friday, exactly as I asked. Eventually, we came to Sde Boker, and I approached the famous hut, and Paula Ben Gurion stood at the door like a sentinel, and she said, "What do you want?" And I answered, "I have an interview with Ben Gurion." And she said, "Okay, come in, but don't tire him." Ben Gurion, on the other hand, was very nice, very accessible, and I was overwhelmed with his charm and with his goodwill.
But was this actually the starting point that you wrote about him and that you became one of the most famous historians about Ben Gurion?
He was such a central figure that in every book I wrote, whether it dealt with Ben Gurion or it did not deal with Ben Gurion, he was the eminence gris. He was the important person behind the scenes. And even though I came to write his biography quite late in my career as a historian, but he played a role in every biography I wrote. And it only shows how central his figure was to the formulation of the Israeli statehood and culture.
At the same time as the Ben Gurions are getting married, 2 world historical events take place, significantly impacting Ben Gurion's future. On November 2, 1917, the Balfour Declaration is released. This is the first time a world power grants the Jewish people the right of a home in Eretz Israel. Shortly thereafter, in December 1917, the Ottomans surrender to the British Army and General Allenby takes Jerusalem without firing a single shot. This leads to the British Mandate over Palestine, which is not to end until May 15, 1948. Dear viewers, I am here in Tel Aviv in the so-called non-stop city. This is where Ben Gurion lived. This is where he had his house. This is where he hosted politicians. And I am very excited to see how David Ben Gurion lived here in Tel Aviv. With a growing family and growing political responsibilities, the Ben Gurions build a new house in Tel Aviv in 1931. Today, it is a museum.
Why did Ben Gurion decide to build his house in Tel Aviv and not in Jerusalem?
So David Ben Gurion decided to build his house in Tel Aviv because in the beginning of the 20th century and after that, Tel Aviv, it's the center of all of the administration of the Zionist movement. Of course, Jerusalem, it's always super important, but Tel Aviv became the first Hebrew city in Israel. It's not a mixed city as Jerusalem, Haifa, Jaffa at that time. For him to live in the first Hebrew city in the middle of the Zionistic leadership, I think it just makes sense.
I have here a quote of Ben Gurion. It's the Bible has bequeathed to our nation and through us to tell of humanity not only a belief in one God who created all, but also lofty human values, the values of human brotherhood, the values of justice and mercy, truth and compassion, equality of nations and peace. Do you think it came from the Bible to offer peace to everyone?
I'm quite sure it is. The idea of living in peace and living together with the other nation and other religions that living around us was something that he really is inspired for. It's one of his dreams that he didn't have a chance to achieve during his life. You know, when the Jewish speak in every Passover, the story of the Haggadah, of how the Jewish people came out of Egypt, one of the stories saying that you have during the night there is a huge fire that show you the way. So I think that David Ben Gurion looked on the Bible as the Amud Esh, this huge fire that show us the way. The Bible gives us an amazing values that also you can find them in the Declaration of Israel. You can find them in a lot of speeches that Ben Gurion told during the year. So for him, the Bible, it's a spiritual guide.
Since the British Mandate, the number of Jews living in the country has grown from around 60,000 to almost 400,000 in 1936. The Arabs react with increasing violence. This leads to the Arab Revolt starting in 1936. The British instruct Lord Peel to investigate the situation on the ground and propose solutions to this conflict. David Ben Gurion, now leader of the Zionist labor movement, member of the executive committee of the World Zionist Organization, and head of the Jewish Agency, is also summoned. When asked how he would explain the Jews' claim to the land, he replies,
300 years ago, there came to the New World a boat, and its name was the Mayflower. The Mayflower's landing on Plymouth Rock was one of the great historical events in the history of England and in the history of America. But I would ask any Englishman sitting here on the commission, what day did the Mayflower leave port? What date was it? I'd like to ask the Americans, did they know what date the Mayflower left port in England? How many people were on the boat? Who were their leaders? What kind of food did they eat on the boat? More than 3,300 years ago, long before the Mayflower, our people left Egypt. And every Jew in the world, wherever he is, knows what day they left. And he knows what food they ate. And we still eat that food every anniversary. And we know who our leader was. And we sit down and tell the story to our children and grandchildren in order to guarantee that it will never be forgotten. And we say our two slogans. Now we may be enslaved, but next year we'll be a free people. Now we are behind the Soviet Union and their prison. Now we're in Germany where Hitler is destroying us. Now we're scattered throughout the world. But next year, will be in Jerusalem. That is the nature of the Jewish people.
As a result of its hearings in Jerusalem, the Peel Commission proposes a division of the country into a Jewish and an Arab state.
It was the first partition plan during the Peel Conference. And actually, England, they offered the Jews only a very small part.
That's right.
But there were only two famous people, Weizmann and Ben Gurion, who didn't resist to the partition plan. Even his son, Amos, was against it. Right?
Yes, but the fact was it never materialized, not because of Jewish resistance, but because of the British giving up the program, because of Arab resistance, because of the feeling that they are going to a world crisis.
But the Arabs, they rejected the partition
Yes.
plan.
The Arabs were very good at rejecting any proposal from that time to this time.
But back to 1936, and Ben Gurion, he mentioned, let me say in a prophetic way, that Hitler is about to kill the Jews in Europe. Did he foresee the upcoming catastrophe?
You know, there are quite a number of prophets in this regard. Jabotinsky, Ben Gurion. I don't think that any of them realized what is going to happen. Yes, they thought about catastrophe. They thought about pogroms, about killings, but they never dreamed about a systematic annihilation of the Jewish people. This was something that was unthinkable.
But in some way he felt it.
He felt it. That's why he wanted to have a Jewish state as soon as possible. But he also knew that even if a Jewish state was established then, it could not save all the Jews.
After the Second World War and the gravest catastrophe for the Jewish people of all times, the Holocaust, the same idea of partition is negotiated by the United Nations. On November 29, 1947, the vote of partition was taken at the UN.
We will start it now. Afghanistan, no. Argentina, abstain. Australia, yes. Belgium, yes. Ethiopia, abstain.
While the voting is being broadcast live on radio, in Bethlehem, an archaeologist is sitting over a strange manuscript. It is Eleazar Lipa Sukenik, the first Jew to behold the recently discovered Qumran manuscripts. Soon he realizes that what he is looking at is a sensational find, an ancient Hebrew scroll that can even be read today. It turns out that on that day, the world votes to grant the Jewish people an independent state in the very same land from which they were expelled almost 2,000 years ago. At the very same hour during the UN vote, a Jew looks at the oldest copy of the book of Isaiah ever found.
Yes. Venezuela, yes.
Of all the books in the Bible, it is the prophet Isaiah who announced several times the restoration of the Jewish people to their ancient homeland.
The resolution of the Dutch Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
The United Nations adopts the partition proposal by a majority. The Jews agree. The Arabs declare they will go to war to prevent the establishment of a Jewish state.
The day after the UN decision, the Arabs start to riot. Another 2 weeks later, the Arab League decides to send soldiers disguised as volunteer laborers to Palestine. They come mainly from Syria, Iraq, and Transjordan. The British do not lift a finger to prevent the campaign. The British agree to keep the road to Jerusalem open. The Arabs close it. As a result, some 100,000 Jews in Jerusalem are cut off from supplies from the outside world. The British refuse to open the port of Tel Aviv. British warships cruise in front of the city. They have literally imposed a naval blockade on Palestine. Jewish ships carrying Holocaust survivors from Europe are blocked. The same thing is happening everywhere. The local Arabs are fleeing on the orders of the Supreme Arab Committee, although we announce that they can stay if they lay down their weapons. In the meantime, we established a kind of Jewish parliament, the Provisional States Council. In its meeting on May 12, 1948, the Declaration of Independence is discussed. On the same day, Moshe Sharett returns from the United States with a message that the U.S. government advises us to wait with the declaration. But if not now, then when?
בארץ ישראל קם העם היהודי. בה עוצבה דמותו.
The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here, their spiritual, religious, and national identity was formed. Here, they achieved independence and created a culture of national and universal significance. Here, they wrote and gave the Bible to the world. Exiled from Palestine, the Jewish people remained faithful to it in all the countries of their dispersion, never ceasing to pray and hope for the return and restoration of their national freedom. By virtue of our natural and historic right, and the resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations, we hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, to be known as the State of Israel. The State of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all of its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace, as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. We extend our hand to all neighboring states and their peoples in an offer of peace and good neighborliness, and appeal to them to establish bonds of cooperation and mutual help, with the sovereign Jewish people settled in its own land. I propose to accept the Declaration of Independence of the Jewish State by rising from the seats. All representatives present, stand up. Rabbi Fishman recites the traditional blessing.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, שהחיינו והתגדלנו והגענו לזמן הזה.
The Secretary of Government, Sue Scherf, calls on the members of the Provisional State Council to sign the document. I then declare, the State of Israel is established. The session is closed.
In his diary on May 14th, Ben Gurion writes,
At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, declaration of the state. The entire country was rejoicing and celebrating. And again, as on November 29, 1947, I am like a mourner among the celebrants. The fate of the state lies in the hands of the security forces.
Ben Gurion suspects that the war, which has been raging since the UN decision in November 47, will intensify after the proclamation of the state. While the American President Truman, at around midnight, recognizes the new Israeli state, the military machine of 5 Arab neighbor states is already running at full speed. Exactly at midnight, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon begin to wage their war of aggression against Israel. Arab troops invade the country from all sides. Tel Aviv is bombarded by the Egyptian Air Force.
He was worried. Of course he was worried. He was a person who knew how to take difficult decisions, even though he feared that this decision can lead to catastrophic results. He had this capability of being afraid and nevertheless making the decision. Ben Gurion knew how dangerous it is, and what's more, he feared that this can lead to a catastrophe. And let's remember, we are talking about 3 years after the end of the war, after the discovery of the Holocaust. And he took the chance. He was very good at taking calculated risks. And the rest is history.
The news of the founding of the State of Israel spreads like wildfire, even in the displaced person camps in Cyprus, Germany, and other countries. Tens of thousands stranded in such camps after the Holocaust are now making their way to their homeland, Israel.
He proclaimed the independent Jewish state, and then the gates of Israel became open for all Jews who wanted to come back. And we saw the main task of the Jewish state to take in as many Jews who are willing to come, not only to take in, but to settle them on the land, if possible, to teach them Hebrew, and to make them as original members of the new Jewish nation.
For David Ben Gurion, the foundation of the state is the basic condition for the fulfillment of the return of the Jewish people scattered all over the world. He knows that now the mass gathering of the Jews can happen, coming from all four ends of the earth, as predicted by the prophets of Israel. Most of the immigrants, though, come from Arab countries in the following years. In 1947, about 1 million Jews live in Arab countries, of whom more than 700,000 flee to Israel. And most of them have to flee. They are expelled by the Arabs. Although they lose their possessions, they find a safe home in the new state of Israel. In 1949, Israel holds its first parliamentary elections. Mapai, Ben Gurion's party, is the clear winner, and David Ben Gurion remains Prime Minister and Defense Minister at the same time. He leads the young state of Israel very successfully until December 1953, when he surprises the country by announcing his intention to resign from all political offices and to retire to the lonely kibbutz Sde Boker in the Negev. The founder of the state, David Ben Gurion, felt encouraged by the prophet Isaiah's statement, "The desert will bloom again." To come here, to live here, and above all, to undertake actions to make the desert bloom again. But if one travels here at over 40 degrees in the shade, like I do right now, you realize how impossible this vision actually appears to be.
We are here in the kibbutz Sde Boker, in the midst of the Negev. But actually, what is a kibbutz? Can you explain that?
Yes, of course. So we are standing in the original section of kibbutz Sde Boker, which is where David Ben Gurion came to live. These are all the original first permanent buildings that were built here. The kibbutz is a collective community, and so they had a very shared lifestyle. where instead of having each person with their own private home, there would be a communal dining hall and a communal laundromat, and they would have a nursery where the children would be raised together.
And Ben Gurion, he came 1953 to this place for the first time.
David Ben Gurion had always believed in the importance of the Negev, both strategically, because the southernmost point of the Negev is Eilat, which is today a bustling tourist city. So he always believed that we need to have a stronghold in the Negev, we need to have populations leading up to Eilat to be able to have a strong position there. So even in the early days when there was nothing here, he would believe very strongly in the importance of the Negev. And so in 1953, so on the way from this kind of drive to see how things are going, he looked out the window and he saw a bunch of tents and shacks that, as far as he was concerned, weren't supposed to be there. He said, okay, hey driver, can we stop please? And got out to see what was going on. And he met this group of 16 youngsters. He was so impressed by them. They had this pioneering spirit and wanted to start a new community. And he said, I couldn't suppress a deep feeling of jealousy that I wasn't able to take part in a effort such as this one.
And then he decided to move over to this place.
Right. At that point, he had been prime minister since the start of Israel, 1948. This is 1953. So after a couple of years of being defense minister and prime minister, he decided to retire. And at the end of that year, he picked up and moved him and his wife Paula to Kibbutz Boker.
The idea of Ben Gurion, or let me say the idea of the prophets, was that the desert will bloom one day. And I saw that you have a winery here. Do you also plant vineyards here in this region?
Yeah, so there are lots of research and development centers that have experimental agriculture to develop different breeds that are more drought resistant. So it definitely is possible to grow things and make the desert bloom. So where Ben Gurion saw there being many challenges to living in the desert, and each challenge presented an opportunity. For example, with the hot sun, we now have solar plants that are creating energy from solar panels. And in 1955 already, David Ben Gurion said that scientists should invest their efforts into discovering ways to create solar energy. So it was almost prophet-like, his vision for how we could turn these challenges into opportunities. It's in 1956 that he envisioned desalination, and now it's coming true as he envisioned. All of that's happening, albeit gradually. This certainly is not the center of population in Israel. Only 8% of Israel's population lives in the Negev, and it takes us 60% of our geography. But slowly but surely, more communities are being built. We have universities, we have high-tech parks. It's a really beautiful thing to see, and I think that slowly but surely, David Ben Gurion's vision for a blooming desert is being achieved.
This political giant, David Ben Gurion, will not remain in the solitude of the Negev desert for too long. In February 1955, triggered by a political crisis in the Israeli Defense Ministry, he is asked by high party friends to take over the defense ministry. He is 69 years old at the time. Of course, he didn't stop with the defense ministry. After the Knesset elections at the end of 1955, he became prime minister again. His house in Tel Aviv is expanded, especially for his growing library.
So we're in the private library of David Ben Gurion. We have about 20,000 books in about 37 languages in here.
How many languages was he able to speak?
He read and write in 11 languages.
11 languages?
Yes, he didn't speak all of those languages. Like Arab, for example, there is a very different, there is a lot of difference between how you read it and how you speak it. So he could read Arabic, but he never spoke Arabs.
How about German?
He spoke German quite well, and also read and write.
In the newly founded Federal Republic of Germany, immediately after his election as Chancellor on September 15, 1949, Konrad Adenauer acknowledges Germany's guilt against the Jewish people. In a letter to Nahum Goldman, chairman of the Jewish Claims Conference, Adenauer writes in December 1951, "I would like to inform you that the federal government considers the time has come for such negotiations should begin. I would like to remark that the federal government acknowledges the problem of reparations as a moral obligation and considers it a duty of honor of the German people to do everything possible to amend the injustice committed against the Jewish people." The talks finally lead to the Luxembourg Agreement, which is signed in September 1952. In it, the Federal Republic of Germany commits to pay the State of Israel an amount of 3 billion Deutschmarks within 12 to 14 years. An additional 450 million marks are committed to the Claims Conference. The fact that Ben Gurion is willing to accept reparation payments from Germany arouses a massive public uproar in Israel.
It was a very emotional problem. People had lost relatives, they lost family.
Yes, therefore, with people who were living in Auschwitz, I don't discuss this question. I know I cannot explain it. I don't expect them to understand it. So with them, I don't discuss it. I discuss it only with people who didn't suffer from themselves. But by reason, this is not reason. It's unjust, it's not Jewish. Because but Jeremiah said, and the same thing said Ezekiel. בימים ההם לא ימרו את אבות אכלו בוסר ושני בנים תקנה. האוכל הבוסר שיניו תקנה. Those who are criminal, they will suffer, but not the children. They're not the fathers for the children. And this is right.
It's interesting. It was a political issue. I remember as a child the slogans that were heard at that time. One slogan was, we won't sell our blood for money. And the majority of the people, strangely enough, supported him, including survivors. And in the records of the police, which arrested many of the protesters, led by Begin, who threw stones at the Knesset, most of them were not survivors. And this is something that shows you that the people who understood reality mostly were the survivors. They wanted to have peace, they wanted to have prosperity, and they understood that the way to this was finding a way to peace with Germany.
It is not until years later, in May 1965, that Israel and the Federal Republic of Germany officially established diplomatic relations. However, David Ben Gurion is no longer Prime Minister at this point. In 1963, he resigns from the highest government office. He remains a member of Knesset representing his party. In addition to Adenauer, Ben Gurion also meets with other German politicians such as Erhard, Strauss, or Brand. The two statesmen, Ben Gurion and Adenauer, only met twice during their lifetime. The second and last meeting takes place in 1966, when Adenauer pays a visit to Ben Gurion at his home in Sde Boker.
to David Ben Gurion's study.
Wow.
He spent many, many, many hours here reading and writing, meeting various dignitaries. David Ben Gurion sitting with Adenauer. Here we have him in the dining hall. So that was in Adenauer's honor.
This is not a fancy restaurant, right?
This is the communal dining hall where all the workers come in on their lunch break.
So he had lunch with the people from the kibbutz?
Yeah.
Wow. Once he quoted the Bible, the book of books has been our most faithful and significant guide. So he was very connected to the Bible, to the prophets.
So David Ben Gurion didn't lead a religiously observant lifestyle himself, but he was very, very connected to the Bible. He knew it intimately. Every verse, every chapter, he was very, very familiar, and he even led Bible study groups weekly in his home for adults.
And what was actually the main point from the Bible? I know it inspired him to come to Sde Boker, to come to the Negev, to have the desert bloom.
When he came here, he went through the entire Bible to find verses that talked about the Bible. So it was the vision of the dry bones resurrecting, when the ingathering of the exiles. So it was definitely a theme that he found, talking about the desert blooming. Absolutely.
On the 29th of January, 1968, Paula Ben Gurion passes away.
Your life must have changed considerably since your wife passed away. Yet you go on working. You're not a crushed man.
A crushed man? No, why should I be crushed?
Many people are crushed by loss.
By
loss.
By loss, yes. Well, of course. I don't feel now what I felt 4 months ago, but I can't help it. I didn't expect that. I was certain that I will die before her. But fate decided otherwise. This can be changed.
David Ben Gurion finally resigns from his Knesset mandate in June 1970 and retires to Sde Boker, devoting himself to writing his memoirs. In the kibbutz, he fulfills his dream of living as a simple man, working and building up the country. Three and a half years later, at the age of 87, in December 1973, after a short illness, David Ben Gurion passes away. Due to his instructions, he is laid to rest next to Paula in front of the Wadi Zin Valley. On his tombstone, he wanted only 3 things to be written: the date of his birth and death, and the date of his immigration to Eretz Israel.
As the years passed by, I come to the conclusion that what his friend and leader Berl Katzenelson said, that Ben Gurion is history's gift for the Jewish people. I think that he was right, because I think today, who among his colleagues would be able to take the decisions that he took. The enormity of the decisions, the risks he was willing to take, and the fact that he was not afraid of public opinion. He always said, I am doing what I think the people need, not what the people want. This is paternalism. But at that time, when in this country there were so many people that came from so many countries, spoke so many languages, and had no common identity, it was very important that at the helm was somebody who knew what to do and was confident with what he was doing.
And you've guided Israel well.
I didn't guide Israel. I guided myself. I never guided Israel.
Do you fear for your country?
Oh, I always feared. I always. Not only now. That state does not yet exist. It's a beginning only.
I am here in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, with great respect and appreciation for the work of David Ben Gurion. Did you know that the Federal Republic of Germany is 1 year younger than the State of Israel? The diplomatic relations that Israel has maintained with the Federal Republic of Germany for almost 60 years, I think has to be considered the greatest miracle in German post-war history. And I believe that not only politicians, but every individual is called upon to work on this bond of friendship and to deepen it. For today, I bid you farewell from Jerusalem with a heartfelt shalom.